Hello, everyone. Thank you for being back. Great that you're still here for this last part of input on today's launch symposium. We will provide you with a sort of a sneak preview on projects that are ongoing, most of which have not been finished yet. So we are very happy to have afterwards conversations over dinner with you. It will be more of a short flashlight presentation style without Q&A. So save your questions for the fun part. And we will start with a presentation by Amani and Alok. Amani Maalouf is a senior research associate at the University of Oxford at the Sustainable Finance Group, and she has a PhD degrees in environmental and water research engineering. So she's one of the engineers that we have been discussing about in the asset level data workshop. Her work applies interdisciplinary methods on environmental life cycle assessments and emission accounting to enable informed decision-making on sustainable finance and climate change mitigation. She has a record of international publications in high-impact peer-reviewed journals, conferences, and book chapters. And we are very happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Alok is a machine learning and data science research associate at the Oxford Sustainable Finance Group, and he holds a PhD in computer science and engineering. His work focuses on training deep learning models with multiple modalities such as text, images, and video. I hand over to you and looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Julia, for your introduction. So first, as a general, briefly here, the outline of this presentation, we're going to provide a general background on spatial finance and asset level data. Then we're going to provide some details about the GeoAsset project. Then my colleague Alok will present more details on the NLP techniques used for asset level information and extraction, and finally the challenges and future plans. So the work we are presenting today is part of our work on spatial finance, which is all about the use of asset level data and geospatial data sets to assess climate and environmental risks, impacts, and opportunities in a bottom-up approach. An important part of this work is the GeoAsset project, which creates open asset databases for high-impact industries. So we are mapping and characterizing the world's most polluting assets using NLP and other AI technologies. And here you can see the GeoAsset sectors of focus. For example, we're working on the cement, on paper and pulp, on waste management facilities. So we are extracting information and knowledge from readily available newspapers, reports, satellite images, and we are employing AI algorithms to extract feature of interest and populate comprehensive asset databases. So briefly, asset data is the foundational building block for bottom-up granular climate and environmental risk, impact, and opportunity analysis. As an example of the sectors that I mentioned earlier is the waste sector, and the waste sector consists of both the wastewater treatment and the solid waste management. So here we're able to identify a wastewater treatment plant in Australia, Sydney, and this wastewater treatment plant receives sewage from 1.5 million people, and as we all know, wastewater treatment and discharge processes are sources of anthropogenic methane and nitrous oxide emissions. So the waste sector in Australia contributed to 3% of the national greenhouse gas emissions. So locating these different facilities and understanding their characteristics and all the asset level information can help us in improve the management of these plants and try to improve the performance and reduce on emissions despite the low contribution to the overall sector. Another example from the waste sector is the solid waste disposal. So here we also located a dump site called La Cheruca in Nicaragua, and this is the largest Latin dump site in Latin America that it receives 1,300 tons per day. Produced from 2 million people, and this site is frequented by 2,000 informal waste pickers that works on site. The dump site is also home of 100 families who live there, children, women working, and other vulnerable people. And national authorities has documented severe respiratory diseases within this population for people living on site and surrounding population, which had an average life expectancy of 50 years. It's important to highlight that currently dump sites receive 40% of the world waste, especially in developing countries. So identifying and closing open dump sites and moving toward sustainable waste management system is a key to achieve a cleaner environment and protect our societies and communities and also the ecosystem. Here briefly is the pipeline for the asset level database development. So again, as an example for the waste sector, for the waste management facilities, we identify both the solid waste facilities such as landfills, dump sites, and other, and wastewater treatment plant. And second step, we conduct an intensive literature and search to identify existing national or regional data sets. And the second, we identify the different attributes or categories related to this sector. An example of these attributes and categories that we are looking at is the geolocation of facilities, the operator, owner, capacity, operational status, and additional different attribute information. So in some cases in these data sets, the attributes are missing. So here we apply NLP methods to identify these missing attributes through looking into different data sources such as newspapers, company websites, and other publicly available data sources. And also in certain locations, because it's very important to identify the location of these different polluting sites. So when these locations are missing, we apply different georeferencing methods to identify these locations. And at the end, which is very important, is the expert validation of all this data that's being collected. And finally, the aim is to develop this global asset level database for the different sectors that I mentioned, and here as an example for the waste sector. So now I'm leaving the floor for my colleague Alok, who will explain more on the NLP techniques that were used for asset level information extraction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. These are the areas of NLP which we can use or which can help us to extract the information from the text what we have. So in the upcoming slide, we will see some of these approaches what we have used, how we have used those approaches, and what was the results. So the first approach, which is like a name entity recognition and relationship extraction. So this particular slide shows like example how we have annotated a data to train a transformer model and to get information from there. So at the side we can see there are some entities over which we have focused. These are the limited one, but we have like based on the sectors we can change them. So like we can see here like based on the context of particular text we have a relationship among the entities which we can use to extract the information from that particular text. So this is the results from the name entities what we got from the transformer. So you will see some of the errors are also here, which totally depends on the type of data what we have used and the amount of data as well. So not only the entities, we also got the relationship among these entities, what kind of a relationship is there, so which help us to drive this particular table from there. So we had this sample text, and then we pass it to our transformer model, which is like we trained it for the name entities and find the relationship among these entities, and then we, based on the relationship we have predicted, we try to locate the organization name, location, in which year, what was the capacity of that particular location. So this was the problem to extract the information, but since we are working over the global asset level database, so based on the countries, the language can change. The documents what we are getting, it will language will get changed. So we need to make the particular language consistent. We have to make the input consistent. Our sector expert need to read the data or validate that particular data. So we use a machine translation to translate a particular data in, let's say we are working in China. So get a data from their search engine Baidu and then translate it using some machine translation model which are publicly available and make it understandable. Sometimes what happens with the name entity relationship and recognition models, like due to ambiguity in a particular sentence contain a multiple capacity and the location. So model get confused, like is it talking about the current capacity or the updated capacity? So we can use a text classification based on the tone of that particular text. We can classify into, okay, this particular sentence is talking about the current capacity or the updated one, and the planned capacity. So not only this, like we have also used the similarity extraction because we are getting information from different news source. So there could be a repetition of information for a same asset. So to avoid the repetition in our database, we can match based on the text name, based on the organization name, and remove all the repetition from the database. So with this, like we have lots of challenges. Availability of the data set, that's the main thing, because like very few governments and organizations will make their data public. And the quality of a data as well, lots of the data is very noisy, inconsistent. You will find so many errors there in terms of spelling and all those things. And other thing is the unstructured data. Sometimes we get the data in the PDF, images, and we have to like pre-process those tags and then pass it to our model. And we know that all the deep learning models are like data hungry model. We need, because of this, we don't have like sufficient data. But as the sector changes, we have to get the data from there and make our training data and then train it. And that's like, so like our future plan is to make a end-to-end pipeline, scrap a data from the internet, then pre-process it, pass it to a particular language model, and get a data in a structured format. So this particular like language model is like, we are not talking about the ChatGPT and those things. Like we are like focus over like either use existing language model like Albert, Palm, which is like publicly available provided by the like Facebook and the Google. So use it for our task, like ask, like we need this is our data and we need our data from this type of data from this text. And this is the like final how our database will look like. This data set is from like Cement database. It covers like 90% of the assets all over the globe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Next, we will have a presentation from a guest, Jean-Baptiste Jacouton. He is a research officer on sustainable finance at the French Agence Française de Développement since 2021. And he concentrates on the role and challenges of public development banks in SDG financing. So another perspective that we have not heard of today yet. And he is involved in coordinating the International Research Initiative on Public Development Banks, where he also developed a systematic SDG reporting model and developed the SDG Prospector, which is an NLP-based tool that he will present today.
Well, thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much to the organization team today for the opportunity. So the proof is in the pudding. When we chose this title with my colleagues and co-authors, Régis Maraudon and Adeline Lanier, I didn't know that I would present this paper in Britain, but I think today it's a good match. So as Julia said, we've been talking a lot about risk since this morning, and I will be trying to talk a bit more about impacts, or at least getting some insights on impacts. But first, a bit of context. So the Agence Française de Développement is a public development bank which is in charge of France's development policy. So we're investing in more than 100 countries, engaging 12 billion euros every year. And in 2020, we initiated the Finance in Common Coalition, which is a coalition gathering all public development banks worldwide. May they be multilateral development banks, such as the World Bank or the EBRD. I think there is a colleague in the room. Also national development banks, just like AFD, or subnational development banks. And altogether, these institutions represent 23 trillion of cumulated total assets. And because they are public institutions, because they have a development mandate, they are called upon to shift and harmonize their strategies towards SDG financing. But when reflecting on this aspect, and when we wanted to know what these institutions are currently doing, we realized, and this is no surprise, that first, not all of them are reporting on the SDGs. Some of them do not simply have the human resource to do this. And those which do report on the SDGs do not use harmonized methodologies. So then we thought maybe using AI would be a great tool to have this first broad overview. And here is a bit of advertisement. So the next Finance in Commons Summit will take place from the 4th to the 6th of September this year in Colombia. So if you're interested, we'll host a session on innovative data at this moment. So using AI to try to map the SDGs in development banks' annual reports, we built the SDG Prospector. So there were existing tools at the time. So when we started back in 2021, but they were mostly using keywords analysis. So introducing a lot of biases in the analysis. So we decided to work with this language model, Roberta, which is a derivative of BERT. We created our own learning base by collecting and labeling paragraphs, more than 8,500 SDG-related paragraphs that we completed by an exclusion universe, meaning in annual reports there are full chapters that are not related to the SDGs, for example, the financials. So we completed this SDG training base with an exclusion universe to help the tool analyzing the reports. And well, the tool is also able to analyze any type of documents, not only reports. So in the end, we're just facing with this flow of information, and we're concentrating on what really matters, that is the SDGs. And I think if we had to collect this data by hand, I would have the same beard today. So this is the type of results that we got by analyzing public development banks' annual reports over the 2016-2020 period. And one of the main results of our analysis was that finally public development banks are banks after all. The narrative is mostly focused on the most productive SDGs, meaning SDG 8 on growth and decent job creation, SDG 9 infrastructure, innovation and industry, and SDG 7 on energy, well, renewable energy. But we see that biodiversity ranks pretty low on the ranking. Another type of visualization here showing the positive correlation between asset size and environmental SDGs. So I'll not comment too much on these graphs, but just what we tried to do was to transform qualitative information into quantitative data to get these kind of visuals. And then, building on these encouraging results, and after batteries and series of tests, we decided to make the technology open. So we released a few weeks ago a website, the SDG Prospector website that you can find very easily on the internet, sdgprospector.org, that allows anyone to upload a document and get SDG analysis based on the SDG Prospector. So here, for example, if you upload AFD strategy in Indonesia, this is the type of data of results that you can get. So here it shows the number of paragraphs in the whole document, the number of SDGs detected, most present SDGs. One interesting feature is that you can play with the intensity of the SDG in your document. So kind of controlling for the SDG Prospector's mistakes. I hope there are very few, but there may be some of them. So for example, if you select 5%, meaning that you will only look at the SDGs that are above 5% in your document, then the graphs automatically adjust. So here you have SDG grouping depending on economy, environment, society, but you can play with other taxonomies, for example here the Brookings, and then you have your graphs adjusting. And here you have another type of representation, and here you can play with a tree map or a histogram. So this is, for example, on a strategy, but it also works on project description, for example. So this is a project from the World Bank, and same type of presentation, and then you can play with the results. But what is quite interesting for financial actors, and well, for example, let's say you're an analyst in equity, is that you can put the firm that you're analyzing annual reports on the SDG prospector and get this kind of analysis, like get a one-pager with this SDG analysis, which is synthesized and also comparable from one institution to the other. And finally, I would like to end this presentation with future developments. Because right now, the SDG prospector is very, very precise, and we're very happy with it. But it's only able to analyze the 17 SDGs, but you know that these are broken down into 169 targets. So this is an avenue for future research, being able to get to these targets and also to factor in their interactions. So when you finance a sanitation project, what is the positive or negative impact on gender and on all the other SDGs? Then we'd like to automate translations for multilingual applications. Right now, the SDG prospector only works in documents that are written in English, but we'd like to open this up, which could also help, for example, public development banks in the global south, for example, that don't have access or do not have the team, trying to get the insights on the impact of their activities. Then, of course, large language models. When we started, we took the methodology that we had at hand, but we're starting looking at the synergies with large language models. For example, getting synthesis of given paragraphs related if you want, for example, synthesis of all the paragraphs on SDG 13 on climate, then LLMs can be of great help for this. And finally, trying to anchor the SDG prospector into more operational applications. So we have a few areas of application internally, but we're also looking for external partners to use the tool, for example, analyzing a portfolio or comparing investments with a national strategy or comparing a strategy with other institution strategy. So if these topics or any other topic that come to your mind are of interest to you, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.
Some help, right? Julia said she will not introduce me. So I'm Marcus, professor at University of Zurich, and for full disclosure, I'm also with Google DeepMind, but whatever I say is not related to Google DeepMind because with this research that 3 partners in crime are actually sitting in the audience, we want to disrupt the rating agency industry. At least this is my dream. And that's the first little stone that we are throwing at them, and let's see what's coming back. It's joint research with a lot of researchers at University of Zurich and Oxford as well, and Nuremberg. And it's collaborative in the sense that we have a different background, and this different background actually pays off quite a lot, this interdisciplinarity, when you do this kind of research. So a little bit of background. I was very pleased, or we were very pleased, when April 30 of this year, the Forbes magazine was actually publishing a short little article and was asking the question whether you are ready for AI-driven radical ESG transparency. And it mentions a couple of tools, and two of them were actually from our research group, which makes me, of course, very happy. And even more, what makes me happy is that our tools are open source, so everybody can use it. So sometimes I feel like a little bit Robin Hood. So what we do it with a lot of passion, but it's not really Robin Hood because we didn't figure out yet how we get the money from the rich. I'm working on that as well. What they didn't know at that time is that we have been already working on ChatReport. So we started our journey, actually, as I mentioned this morning, with ClimateBird. And ClimateBird started in 2019, and it's obviously of use for practitioners, so we're actually very happy about that. Then we started ChatIPCC, which is kind of a tool that we then published on our website, chatclimate.ai, where everybody can ask questions about climate, and the question is then answered based on the current knowledge from the IPCC reports. And you can add something like explain it to a 6-year-old child, and then you can use the magic of this generative AI model so that you get an answer which is actually understandable for what you want it to be, right? And then it's also grounded in the sense that you get the references to the IPCC reports, the 6,000 pages written up there. It's now called Chat Climate because I got a very angry email from the communication office from the IPCC that don't call it Chat IPCC because we are not endorsing that. So we call it now Chat Climate. So what is ChatReport? Well, we all know and we have heard of the problems with large language models. There are basically two problems. One is hallucination, and the other one, if you talk about normal ChatGPT and not about Perplexity.ai or the new Bing, actuality. So you want the model to be actual in the sense that you use information not from September 21, but actually the information that is available these days. Nevertheless, people are often using these large language models for a tool for everything. So whatever your problem is, just ask ChatGPT and it will give you an answer. Yes, it will give you an answer, but the answer might not be actually a very good answer, right? So when you want to know, for instance, from whether Petrobras, what kind of metric they're using to assess their climate-related risks, you get an answer from ChatGPT because ChatGPT is kind enough, it's trained to be kind enough to give you an answer, and it gives a very eloquent answer. But it's not, as we all know, it's not reliable. So how can you actually do that? Well, you can still use the magic of the large language models, but first you need to do kind of information retrieval, right? So you have some kind of documents or a database where you have the information available in terms of chunks of text, and then you need to index this chunk of text. You have a question, and then the question identifies, or your algorithm identifies the chunks that it needs in order to then generate the answer. And you also force the language model to tell you from which reference you are actually taking this information from. So then, as a human, you can go back and check whether the source is actually the right one that you have been using, right? And this is what we have done with our ChatReport. So what we have been thinking is that, what are these rating agencies doing all day? Well, they're actually reading reports. Okay, language models can read reports, but what they do more is they have kind of an idea of how a sustainability report should look like. Where do they take this idea from? Well, maybe they want to assess a report according to the TCFD requirements or to the TCFD framework. So they ask certain questions in their head to the report and then make an assessment along these dimensions of the TCFD report. And that's what we actually did in ChatReport. So we were trying to encode the TCFD framework along these dimensions that are important according to the TCFD framework, and then see whether this information is available in the report and whether it's written in a way that is conform with the TCFD requirements. So we know that in the TCFD recommendations, there are basically like 11 different questions that a good report should provide an answer to. So you take these answers, you try to find the relevant text passages in the report, you get a answer to these questions. It's like a summarization. But then the TCFD report also tells you how a qualitatively good answer should look like. So you take this additional information and you make an assessment of this answer. And then you ask how good is this answer, this question answered in the report. And there goes a little bit of prompt engineering into that and some feedback with our experts like Julia telling us, well, you know, this answer is not so good. So we tried to force then through the prompting that it's kind of calibrated more or less, right? And this is what the analysts, or let's say the junior analysts do at the big rating agencies, right? Day in, day out. And with ChatReport, you can do that now in 30 seconds. So you have an example like the question, what target does the organization use to understand, quantify, blah, 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 blah. And then you get an answer from the report. And then according to the TCFD recommendations, you get like an analysis. You get a reasoning. It's always dangerous to call it reasoning when large language models are, let's call it reasoning. You get a reasoning of why the large language, of what the large language model, how the large language model assesses the answer. And then you get also a score for this question number 11. And then you get from all these 11 questions, you can do an aggregated score, call it TCFD conformity score, because it's nothing else, right? So I don't say we're doing a good thing here. I just say we do what rating agencies do. And I don't say that rating agencies are doing a good thing, but it's costly, right? It's a costly, ineffective process of what rating agencies are delivering to us. So why not do that through a 30-second large language model? And when you look at how the TCFD conformity score changed over the year, so you see that there's a lot of massaging of words going on in the TCFD report. So the the red one is like the TCFD conformity score in 2016. Obviously, nobody has known about the TCFD at that time. So it's good that our algorithm is actually skewed here to the left. And then in 2021, 22, you see that it moves to the right, as it should be, right? Again, disclaimer, it does not mean that actually companies are walking their talk. It just means that they're massaging the words in the right way, so it's TCFD conform, right? The other thing that we do is, with this tool, is actually providing users to ask their own questions. So for instance, if you have a question like, is the transition plan compatible with a 1.5 degree pathway, then you can directly ask the document whether they say something about that information you want to have, or whether they do not, right? And then you also get the pages, if there are some pages that talk about this. And since I don't believe in internet, we made a short video on how that works. So basically, you have a report, you upload it, and then you wait a little bit, usually around 30 seconds. Then you get from a well-known Swiss company the analysis along the full pillars of the TCFD report with the 11 questions allocated to these different pillars. Then you can scroll through it. Again, in 30 seconds, right? Usually you wait, I don't know, a month for a rating agency to provide you feedback, and then you get also a big bill. And then you can ask your own questions, and we hope that within next week that we have that available on chatclimate.ai for free. It's not sustainable, of course, but we try our best and hope that people will use it. Of course, we're going to collect the data. We're going to collect questions because that will eventually help us to improve the models in the future. And this is important, right? We don't say that this is the final answer. We are academics. We live in the wood, so to say. So we can do errors. It's not like being a company, so we can do errors, and we have to do errors in order to improve our methods. So thank you very much for listening.
For what's out there in the internet, hopefully soon. In order to keep you busy and your thoughts running in the meantime, we have another presentation from an external partner project, which is given by Anne Schönauer. She's the project lead of the TILT program, which is at TEA Finance Labs. And TEA Finance Labs, as probably some of you know, has just recently been renamed from the 2-Degree Investing Initiative. Her role focuses on developing climate-related data, specifically for small and medium-sized enterprises. And she works together with European banks and financial supervisors. In addition, Anne is doing a PhD at the Humboldt University and applies the knowledge that she gathers at 2 degrees and vice versa. Looking forward to see what you have to show for SMEs, because this is quite a crucial topic. If everyone talks about value chains, we need to talk about SMEs.
For this kind introduction, Julia, and especially also for giving me the chance to present our work today. So I will present our climate database that we built up especially for small, medium enterprises. But before I'm doing this, I will just give you a really quick introduction where I'm actually coming from. So Julia was already mentioning it's the TEA Finance Lab. Previously, we were known as 2 Degrees Investing Initiative in Germany. But just recently had a rebrand. And TEA Finance Lab actually really wants to incubate new ideas for the financial market. So we are a non-profit think tank, meaning that we come up with new ideas, are grant funded normally, and then try to make the ideas market ready so that they can be picked up in the financial system. So when we started with this climate database, we actually were looking into the status quo, or we're looking into the financial system, and we saw, okay, there are actually a lot of going on with climate metrics and climate assessment, but for larger and listed companies. And we also saw that some of those metrics were actually based on very unclear assumptions, or was not very transparent of how, for example, the ESG scores actually came up with. And the reasons why that's the case, or why we thought, okay, that's like kind of naturally that we are looking into like listed and larger companies, is that we first face disclosure requirements for those larger and listed companies, but also that we just have more information for those companies. And we said, okay, that's actually a problem, because also smaller and medium enterprises are crucial for a transition, especially when it comes to supply chains, but also when it comes to like social components, right? So about 90% of all companies within Germany are small and medium. We have more than 60% of people like really working in those smaller and medium enterprises. So we really said, okay, we do want to also focus on those companies. However, we do lack data, and we really wanted to solve it, because we knew that the banks are really only focusing on those SMEs and will finance mitigation adaptation measures if we do have the data available. And we also wanted to solve it in the way that it's not a black box model, so all our code is publicly available, so it's also open source and on GitHub, even though we are still in a prototype phase. So if you now look into GitHub and you Google Tilt, yeah, it's still like in a prototype phase. So how do we try to solve this problem? So we want to create 3 things. So that's first the Tilt data, then Tilt indicators, and a software that's then calculating those indicators automatically. And our target audience right now are banks, policymakers, and researchers. And we really think about 3 use cases about this data and those indicators, namely, first, you identify risks, so physical and transition risks, but also like upstream supply chain risks at the moment. The second use case is to do engagement, so really thinking about, okay, how can a loan really finance mitigation adaptation measures, but then like thirdly also thinking about reporting as not for now, but it will be also most likely mandatory for small and medium enterprises to report on sustainability issues. And our principles, as I said before, are really open source algorithm to really ensure transparency and user involvement. So we are working currently with 11 European banks and are road testing with 5 of them our data set. So really go through the data with them, understand the need. Science-based, so there's a cooperation with universities, and then independent, as we are, like really research grant funded and also from philanthropies. And to give you a better understanding of like how this whole process actually goes along, we start with web scraping information from companies and also product data. And SMEs, they normally have like their own website, not always, but sometimes. But they also are, for example, at business-to-business website where they really advertise their products, for example. And what we did was web scraping from 280,000 companies across 5 countries that we now focused on, informations like company name, address, sector, the products, but also if the company is actually a producer or a manufacturer or a trader. And after having pre-processed all the data, we match this then with other climate databases. So, for example, we use a life cycle inventory database, EcoInvent, that gives us, for example, a carbon footprint of a product. So really trying to match climate database with those products that we, or like with those information that we web scraped. And we calculated 8 indicators that are assessing a company based on, like, as you can see here, 5 transition risk indicators, then 1 physical risk indicator, 1 sustainability indicator, and we are also looking into EU taxonomy eligibility because alignment is really, really hard to get. And as I said also before, we are now involving like 5 European banks and 2 central banks that we work with to really understand also their needs. And I just brought one indicator to make it even more like concrete of how we do it. So here, it's now one example that I put up here, the Bördeland GmbH, which is a really small agriculture company in Sachsen-Anhalt for those that come from Germany. So it's a really small company. And it's producing cereals and grains and cattle. And we know that it's a manufacturer, so it's really producing those products. And we then match it to EcoInvent, which then gives us like the carbon footprint of those specific products. And in this case here, we then rank all those products to each other and then benchmark those products relatively to each other. So in this case here, we have like 2/3 of all the products, namely wheat and oat production, are actually having like then a low transition risk exposure, and the beef cattle production would have been a high transition risk exposure. So 1/3 would be in the high transition risk exposure category. And now, like, how do we use NLP? So there are two problems that we needed to solve, and where NLP was very helpful. So the first one was to pre-process the data. So when you web scrape data, it's super untidy, and we really needed to kind of make it, or like it was really noisy and messy, so we really needed to structure it. So we harmonized it, language deduction, but also like fuzzy deduplication that we solved with NLP. And then the second use case was when we matched those two databases to each other. And I now just mentioned EcoInvent, but there are like 3 other climate databases that we match our information, our web scrape data from. And here, NLP was really, really helpful. And as I said, we are still in the prototype phase. So I pointed out 3 main problems that we have at the moment with NLP, namely how do we improve matching quality. So in one data set, or like in the web scrape data, for example, we have shoes as one product, and it was then after we did the matching, it was then matched to cheese, which makes sense, like from a natural language processing model, maybe that cheese is associated with shoes. But we really just need to like get better matching quality, and here we are just like in the phase of reconsidering this. Then one thing which really drives us is how do we assess performance? So we can't be sure that we have like a 100% accurate match at the end for all the data points that we have, but what is kind of the threshold which would be okay for the financial markets? And then the last point, like how do we communicate transparently about those models? And especially because we want to be transparent and we don't want to provide black box models. So here I also more than happy to speak to people that already thought about those problems. So thank you very much. That was the end of my presentation, and I'm very much looking forward for further feedback and discussions during dinner.
Thank you very much for that, Anna. And now we are going for another joint presentation by Tobias Szymanski and Kamila Hislop. Kamila is the data lead for the Net Zero Tracker initiative, where she coordinates the data collection of the net zero targets and climate commitments of countries, regions, cities, and the biggest companies. She is also doing a doctorate at the University of Oxford and on the governance of carbon dioxide removal in the context of net zero. Before being in Oxford, she worked as a lawyer in South Africa, which is an interesting add-on, I think. And Tobias Szymanski is a PhD candidate at the University of Zurich, and I think I introduced him already before for the workshops, so I will not repeat myself here.
Start to get started. So the Net Zero Tracker is a publicly available database, which is great, right? So anyone can use it, and lots of people do use it for very many different things. So yesterday, someone tried to sell me our free data, But Toby did something really cool with it. So he's going to talk a little bit about it later. I'm going to introduce what we do at the tracker. But just as a quick thing of background, we're just going to talk a little bit about net zero. This is from our latest report, looking at the data that we have from December 2020 to last month. And you can see, as we all know, there's been an uptick in net zero. And that's what we're responding to at the tracker. We're interested in who has net zero targets and then also how robust they are. And to think about that, we look at 4 major buckets of indicators. So we're looking at targets. Is there a net zero target and is there an interim target? And included in the net zero kind of bucket, we look at, also climate neutral or carbon neutral, because there seems to be quite a lot of confusion with actors as to really what they're thinking about. Then we look at what does that cover? So is it all greenhouse gases? Is it just carbon? Is it all scopes? Is it just scope 1, which is very usual? Is there a plan to get there? Are there reporting mechanisms? Is the leadership going to be accountable for that? And then lastly, we're interested in the net bit of net zero. So are they planning to use carbon offsets? Are they thinking at all about carbon dioxide removal? And we look at these 4 buckets at a range of actors. So we look at all the UNFCCC countries, the regions of the 25 biggest emitting countries. So that could be, California. We look at all cities over 500,000 inhabitants, and then, crucially, the Forbes 2000 biggest publicly listed companies. And that is quite a lot of data, And we initially were doing that just with volunteers here at Oxford, and running off a Google alert to my email address. And we decided that wasn't really that great for keeping on top of things, and also my inbox. So we started thinking a little bit about how we could use AI, and we have now successfully done some web scraping, which I can bore you about later. I'm much more interesting once you've had a drink. But Toby is very interesting, and he's going to talk about something that's a lot more interesting than my web scraping, which is really great, and I'm very proud of it. So I'm going to hand over to Toby.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to outline that as we talk about natural language processing, I'll move a bit closer. We're all friends now, I hope. As we talk about natural language processing, I think it is very important to outline, as we have many organizations here, that actually data collection, data labeling, which is essentially, when I was looking at the project and the data, what was done. People just labeled the data without having an intention to build a natural language processing model. But this is very important. So before I even start, be aware of that. You might collect data which is very valuable, and you're not even aware at this point. And as we all know, data is the new oil, and if we want to remove oil companies, we might use the new oil. So if you ever use this quote, cite me please. It took me very long to come up with this. Now to get started, I think we described it quite a lot today, that there's 2 things in this world. We have a vast amount of data, be it unstructured data, be it in terms of verbal communication, through earning calls, through any spoken form, or annual reports. So a lot of data out there. And on the other hand, we have, and this is very valuable, as I said, people that actually collect this data, actually categorize this data, structure this data. And once I saw it, I thought about building a bridge called Climate Net Zero. We thought about building the bridge and create this tool that could assess or help to assess it automatically. I think as all AI tools, you kind of think about what do you want to assess, and we have 2 dimensions. The first one is target, and the other one is ambitions. Targets is pretty straightforward. We already heard that the climate and the net zero tracker is assessing a lot of data categories. Particularly, I was focusing on reduction and net zero targets. Reduction would mean we have a company states to have a reduction of 16% by 2030. Net zero is the ultimate reduction target. I think we are all aware of that. And there we have a target year. So what we did is basically build bird models and also use ChatGPT to assess how good the models could be in identifying those targets. And we came up with a very fortunate result. Climate Bird, the model developed by our partners in crime, this is, as Marcus put it, was performing the best, which is not surprising because Climate Bird was trained on, or basically pre-trained on climate-related text, so it can understand climate-related text the best. What is kind of remarkable is that it even outperformed like the large language models. In our workshop, we already talked about that, so don't forget about those classifiers. We reached over 95% accuracy on 3 labels, so it's quite, the model can quite efficiently, not only efficiently, but also successfully detect those labels. To enhance that capability, we also looked at ambitions, and we defined ambitions similar to what we see in the data with with additional metrics. So for the net zero year or for the net zero target, it's the year. The net zero year by which the company wants to reach net zero. For the reduction, it's a bit more complex. We have the target as well as the time frame. So we have a baseline year and we have a target year. We again used bird models. I did that on purpose to kind of outline how good the base models are, because we all know this project is also a bit about climate awareness. So we all know that larger models will produce more energy. And it turned out that they function quite well. So we had, for the majority of the tasks, it was 90% of the cases possible to actually detect everything. So kind of a good result, because it showed that both the target and the ambition can be identified quite efficiently. We further developed a use case, like just to show the large-scale analysis capabilities. That one could be run in actually Google Colab, so kind of reproducible once you have the data, of course. These were earnings calls from 2003 to 2022 from US companies, and we looked at reduction and net zero communication. And what you can see is quite interesting, that reduction targets probably, because reduction target doesn't need to have like the baseline year, target year, reduction target itself. The company could generically talk about reduction. That could be any talk, and it seems like people talked about reduction already quite some time, but we see that the connection, and this is why it makes sense to also differentiate between those two labels. The net zero, communication just increased over the recent years from 2019 on. Giving a bit more depth to that. That's probably where, or it actually is, where many green investors started to investing in green products. So it is kind of, in my research, I see this quite a lot, that 2019 must be some kind of year. Cannot explain exactly why, but did you show me something? Oh, okay. I just, to wrap this up, I just wanted to also give an overview over the Climate Bird family, because this is where this whole project comes from. I want to outline this because these models are publicly available. Net Zero will be publicly available as well. We have a lot of models to evaluate climate, environmental claims, linguistic patterns like specificity or commitments, and we will develop much more. We will stick with smaller models as well, for something like social governance, net zero. If you want to keep updated, I think I can say this, being in my generation, then follow me on social media. This is my name. Or follow Marcus, follow any one of the group. You'll be updated. Thank you very much to Camilla also for collecting the data, and thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think that's a great example of a back-of-the-envelope cooperation. I got so excited when I saw Camilla's database, or the team's database that Camilla works with, and I was like, we can use that. So yeah, it's amazing to see how the two of you managed to get something out of out of that rough idea. I think that was in February or something. Yeah. So for the reminder, I am here to unfortunately replace Chiara Collesanti-Seni, who is sick and cannot come. She was about to present our work on greenwashing indicators. So I have to talk more. Sorry for that. I hope you're not tired about listening to myself. But then, as a good thing, we have also Benjamin Franter joining later on climate litigation aspects of that domain. So you will have some changes as well during the presentation. So to start off with, one of the core features that we wanted to elaborate on also in the future about the NLP for Sustainable Finance program is to analyze net zero targets further and especially also transition pathways. We want to identify whether there's the relevant disclosure items being actually disclosed with various standards, but also with the common ground of the various standards. We want to use that to examine the ambition and track the process against implementing the transition plans of corporates of any kind, and enable investors and financial supervisors alike to monitor the quality of the plans, to identify inconsistencies and track implementation progress. And we have heard about that, I think, during various presentations and comments today, so happy to discuss that any further, but we will work on that for sure in the next steps of this program. So far what we did, we collected for more than 24 different frameworks and initiatives on net zero and transition plans the common grounds. So we assessed for each of the initiative, sorry Natalia, I can go back. We assessed for each of the initiatives the year where we identified the initiatives from the years 2021 until 2023. We used both targeted companies, both from high-emitting corporates and financial institutions, and also any form of document focusing on either strategy development or pure risk analysis. The assessment that the individual frameworks take are various kinds. So we have, for example, disclosure-focused frameworks, we have ambition-focused frameworks, and we have credibility-focused frameworks, or pure activity-focused frameworks. This is sort of a categorization that we made in order to identify better where the different frameworks come from. But this is the broad perspective that most of them take. We wanted to identify then the common structure of the various frameworks. We have a target usually. We have the elements for each of the targets. We have governance indicators, we have strategy indicators, and we have tracking against of the progress indicators. For each of these individual broader structure elements, we identified flexible elements that can be used to assess both the credibility and the ambition of the individual item that's disclosed. We were referring to that also to internal and external consistency assessment. So credibility relates to internal consistency. In case that you do not fulfill a certain criterion as a company in your disclosures, that might mean there's a red flag on your internal consistency, meaning your target is sort of fed into your entire business strategy or your entire process or not. And ambition relates to the external consistency, so which means are your targets and your goals and the implementation of your entire transition plan in line with the global requirements or the national requirements or your sectoral requirements. And that enables us to identify simple red flag assessments. So just to give you a preview of how that looks like at the moment, it's a huge table identifying for each of the individual four categories target, for example, individual elements, headline, ambition, coverage, pathway, offsetting, for example. And each of these individual elements can be then assessed by an individual requirement. And this requirement would then be linked to a credibility red flag trigger or an ambition red flag trigger. As we all know, nobody's going to read all this, fill out these tables, and so on and so forth. So that's why we will again work on extracting the information in an automated manner based on natural language processing in our tools. And that will enable us in the end, hopefully, to compare corporate disclosures with real activities, identify the discrepancies and the inconsistencies between their claims and the actions, and ensure greater transparency and accountability in the sustainable finance sector in general. And since this is also very closely related to any kind of legal threats and litigation, I hand over to Benjamin Franter. He is the founding head of the Climate Litigation Lab and Senior Research Fellow at the University of Oxford Sustainable Law Program. And the Climate Litigation Lab itself, it's a multidisciplinary research initiative to inform, enable, and accelerate climate change litigation globally. So I think another multidisciplinary endeavor here in the room. Ben holds a joint degree from Stanford Law School and is a licensed attorney with the California State Bar and has a PhD in both history of science from Stanford and a PhD in applied physics from Harvard University. I spare the MSc and the BA because you have such a long track record that I hand over to you.
Thanks, Julia. Hi, so I don't have any slides. I'm just going to talk about litigation and how some of this could be applied within litigation. And I hope this is exciting for the end of the day. You know, litigation is kind of a dramatic activity. Hopefully that keeps us all engaged. So just to start, I'm going to give you an overview of just what's happening in climate litigation today, globally. What are the major categories that we see in terms of climate lawsuits? This is sort of the constellation. So you might have heard about a couple of these suits in the Netherlands, this Urgenda case, one of them is called, and another case against Royal Dutch Shell. And these cases follow a similar strategy. These cases are trying to force corporates or governments to align their policies, either their corporate policy or their government policy, with the Paris Agreement as a sort of standard of reasonable behavior for a government or for a corporate in today's world. You can think about these as Paris injunction cases. They all seek an injunction based on the Paris Agreement to reduce emissions. And this is one of the big strategies that's being applied today in climate litigation. We see a lot of this litigation in Europe. We don't see a lot of it in the US because it doesn't fit quite as well with that legal system, but we see a lot of it in Europe, and it could be exported to other parts of the world as well. And I think just to kind of connect this to our topic today, the key question for those cases is this defendant, whether it's a government or a corporate, are they doing everything they can reasonably do to reduce emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, yes or no? And if they're not, then is there a legal basis for doing so? But I think that first question, the fact question, is something that machine learning could potentially help with as we understand what these companies, for example, are doing. Another big category of case is damages cases. And you might know about tobacco litigation or asbestos litigation, or most recently the opioid litigation in the US. These kinds of suits are basically based on the story, they knew, they lied, people died. That's basically the story that fits all, corporate toxic deception torts. And so we see suits like this now on climate change, mostly in the United States, where this kind of litigation is really common and very lucrative, because the lawyers who bring these cases can, if they win, share in some of the damages that are awarded. So we have about 24, or we see about 24 or so cases in the US so far, brought by governmental entities. So these are brought by cities and states, to recoup the costs of adaptation to climate change. They want the fossil fuel companies to help pay for part of that damage. It's exactly the same model as opioid litigation or the big tobacco litigation in the 1990s in the US as well. So that's another big category. There's huge liability, of course, associated with that kind of litigation, arguably trillions of dollars if it scales. And so that's another area. And so we might want to think about, how do we assess what climate damages are in different geographies and from different kinds of impacts? Is there a way to bring that information together in an easy way or a rapid way for litigators to scope these cases? The third category is greenwashing litigation. And, again, this is a little bit like the tobacco litigation. They marketed their filtered cigarettes as safer, for example, but that was a micro truth and a macro lie, because even though when you smoke a filtered cigarette, because people titrate the amount of nicotine in their bloodstream, they just smoke more cigarettes if they smoke filtered cigarettes. So that's an example of kind of a misleading marketing tool. And we see the same thing today with promoting natural gas as clean burning or things like that. So greenwashing litigation is another big category. And again, we see lawsuits already brought by cities and states and legal nonprofits and NGOs against mostly fossil fuel companies, but some power utilities and other defendants as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about greenwashing litigation. So far we have the Paris injunctions, damages, and greenwashing. Fourth is human rights and international courts. So we're seeing courts like the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, the International Court of Justice, and others looking at the climate change issue and trying to articulate some sort of standard of behavior for governments to follow with regard to climate change. And again, evidence of how climate change impacts human rights around the world is really important for that from a fact basis. And then the last one I'll mention is what is sometimes called frontline fights, frontline suits, project-based suits. You might think of these as a lawsuit that surrounds a refinery or a petrochemical facility or something like that, something that's polluting the local community and harming the people that live immediately around it. So when I see, these tools like the polluting asset geospatial information that we heard about earlier, I think stuff like that is really useful potentially for this kind of litigation. And of course, even though these cases are based in one location, they're highly scalable because, of course, if you prove a theory on one refinery, you can scale it up to thousands more across a nation or the world. There's some emerging areas of litigation that haven't really been figured out yet. The concept hasn't quite been proved, but we're seeing things move to that. One is finance-based litigation, which I think is pretty relevant for a lot of people here. Another is nature and biodiversity-based litigation. And the legal frameworks surrounding nature have not really been really well developed yet, but people are realizing we probably need to do this because we're not separate from nature, and what we're doing to the whole world affects everything, including us. So with the last minute, I'm just going to tell you about this project we're doing at the Climate Litigation Lab. So we started this new project on greenwashing, and we are focusing first on consumer-facing greenwashing. So we're building this open source database that crawls social media, it finds any sustainability-related ad, pulls it, tags it with brand, what's the theme, and so on. So any researcher, journalist, litigator can use that for research for their case. And then the last thing I'll mention that's sort of, I think, next, that's consumer-facing greenwashing, but there's investor-facing greenwashing too. So if we think about all the proxy statements and the investor calls and the shareholder reports, what's being said in those statements to investors if those are objectively misleading, that can be per se unlawful or against SEC rules or other laws. And so tools to search through those things rapidly and identify, for example, with these LLMs, hey, what is this company telling investors about its sustainability strategy? What's it saying about natural gas? Is it selling hydrogen as available right now and clean? What's it saying about these things? Those are all really useful for cases, potentially. So I think I'm probably out of time. I think. I see an affirmative smile, I think. So I'll leave it there, and hopefully that's some food for thought for dinner. So thank you.